Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Discus Ask the Expert series, the webinar entitled Tariffs on the Horizon. We'll get started in about a minute or two. Thank you all for joining us. All right, it's 1:02. Good afternoon again, everyone. I know we still have people joining. We had a lot of interest in this webinar. My name is Christine Locascio. I'm the Chief of Policy Strategy and Membership at the Distilled Spirits Council. Again, welcome to all of our members, all of our non-members, all of our partners, and prospective members. Welcome to this Ask the Expert series, the topic of which is tariffs, whether they're on the horizon or not. And so pleased to be joined by Allison Levitt, who is the Managing Director of the Wines and Spirits Shippers Association. We're scheduled to have a very interesting call to hear from her and her members on their perspective of what they're thinking about the possibility of tariffs. So with that, let's take care of some housekeeping first. The first thing to note is that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website shortly after the call. And a couple of housekeeping things. We do have to go over our antitrust compliance policy to please be mindful of our policy and refrain from discussing or exchanging information related to pricing, marketing, or sales, costs or confidential plans regarding output or production, boycotting another company, not recruiting or hiring each other's employees or salaries, wages, or benefits, or any other competitively sensitive or proprietary business information. This meeting does include private and sensitive information. Please do not record or transcribe this meeting using any other electronic device or software, including but not limited to any AI recording or note-taking software. So with that, let's jump right into our discussion today. And before we do that, a little background and scene setting is necessary to talk about tariffs and the distilled spirits industry. Next slide. So, of course, export markets are increasingly important for U.S. spirits producers, and there has certainly been a lot of news lately on tariffs. But it goes without saying, how important over the past several years the export markets have become for the U.S. spirits industry. As you see here, we issue an annual report on U.S. spirits exports every March, and our 2024 report should be coming out soon, so please stay tuned for that. But just I want to highlight a few factoids for you here just to highlight the importance. So in 2023, we exported more than $2.2 billion worth of exports around the world from 45 states. And that really is a testament to the growth of craft distillers across the United States and, of course, in the District of Columbia. 63% of our global exports were accounted for by American whiskeys, and that includes bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, and American rye whiskey, and American single malt. And about half of American whiskey exports go to the EU. Next slide. So to see how important exports have become for our industry, just take a look at this chart, which shows the tremendous growth over the past 2 decades, reflecting almost a quadrupling in the value of our exports. And I think we can all agree that is certainly a really important American success story. Next slide. But unfortunately, our industry got caught up in some trade disputes that were unrelated to us. So to go back into a little bit of history, but I think it's important to highlight the impact that tariffs had on our exports. Back in 2018, we got caught up in these trade disputes, which resulted in the imposition initially of a 25% tariff on American whiskeys and other U.S. spirits in key markets like the EU and the UK, which, as you see here, did have a detrimental impact on our exports during that period. But again, a little bit of history. Prior to 2018, the US, the EU, and the UK, in fact, going all the way back to 1997, had zero duties on practically all spirits traded between our nations. And this was called the Zero for Zero Agreement on Trade in Spirits. And our industry really thrived having that duty-free access to our key markets like the EU and the UK. And when those 25% tariffs that were imposed starting in 2018 were suspended starting in 2021, you can see how the exports started to rebound. Now go to the next slide, please, Louise. Thank you. And looking specifically at American whiskey exports to the EU during that period, you can see the 20% drop followed by a 60% increase when the tariffs were lifted and we returned to zero duties. Next slide. So this slides, we did have a resetting of the US-EU relationship, and it led to us a return to duty-free trade. But the question right now that brings us all together is for how long? And we're not really sure. So this shows that, they were suspended and the timeline under which that took. And currently, there are several things that are swirling around us, but one concerns the ongoing dispute between the U.S. and the EU on steel and aluminum. And under one of those agreements, the EU agreed to suspend the tariff on American whiskeys for a certain period, but to reimpose them at 50% come April 1, 2025, if there was no deal on steel and aluminum. But as you may have seen, there's been a lot of activity on tariffs with the new administration. And on February 9th, President Trump signed an executive order imposing 25% tariffs on all imports of steel and aluminum from all countries effective March 12th. So it remains to be seen how the EU will respond given this upcoming deadline, which we've noted here. But certainly, what we are hoping is that our leaders will get together and come together and solve this. And as you may have seen in the press, the EU Trade Commissioner was in Washington this week and had, we think, productive meetings with the new Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, the USTR, the United States Trade Representative Designate Jamieson Greer, and the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett just yesterday. So it is certainly positive that the US and the EU leaders are engaging in a dialogue, and we certainly hope that a resolution can be agreed to ensure that the 50% tariff is not imposed by the EU on American whiskeys. Next slide. Now, we've heard about Canada and Mexico too, and the tariffs between the US, Canada, and Mexico have been averted for now. And a 25% tariff is paused and will not take effect until March 4th. Canada had proposed retaliatory tariffs of 25% on all US beverage alcohol imports. And in fact, you may have seen some press that some provinces actually threatened to remove US beverage alcohol from store shelves. Now, thankfully, we don't believe that has happened, and Mexico has not issued a proposed list. But again, we are hopeful that the leaders of the United States, Canada, and Mexico can agree, and that our imports and exports of distilled spirits will not be impacted. Now, we've also heard about reciprocal tariffs. We go to the next slide, please. Last Thursday, President Trump signed a memorandum on reciprocal trade and tariffs, which initiated a comprehensive review of each country's tariff and non-tariff barriers to determine an equivalent reciprocal tariff for imports from every country. It doesn't include an actual order to impose these tariffs at this point. It was requested that a report and determinations be provided by the relevant agencies by April 1st. So under that, the USTR and Secretary of Commerce shall consult and provide recommendations in a report to President Trump detailing any proposed remedies in pursuit of reciprocal trade. Now, I mention all of that because, interestingly, U.S. spirits are somewhat unique in that we have fair and reciprocal trade with most of our major trading partners. And the takeaway here is that 86% of our exports already go to countries with zero tariffs. Now, I've put the flags here of the major trading partners. This is not all of them, because in fact, we have zero duties with 51 countries around the world. Of course, the EU accounts for 27 of those. And if anyone wants the list, please, you can contact me later. I'll happily provide you the list where we have zero duties. Again, that's 51 countries. And then the second thing I would say that is unique about our industry is that American whiskeys are recognized as distinctly American by 45 countries. And these are actual government-to-government arrangements, agreements, formal agreements, whereby all of these countries listed here have recognized bourbon and Tennessee whiskey as distinctive products of the United States. And then in addition, in Mexico, they will be starting a process to recognize, in addition to those two, American rye whiskey. So in exchange, the United States recognizes, certain other distinctive spirits, and we can all guess what those are. But it's a limited number of products. But products like cognac, tequila, Canadian whiskey, Scotch whiskey, and several others. But the reason this is important is that what this does, it ensures that the producers of these products are getting the protections of the prestige and the quality and what is known for these products, but it protects the producers of these products and consumers alike. So U.S. consumers of products like cognac and tequila and Scotch whiskey can be sure that these products are made in accordance with the very strict production methods that exist in their countries of origin. So for cognac, it's France, and for tequila, it's Mexico, etc. And it also ensures that our producers who have lovingly prepared and aged, American whiskeys for years and years can be certain that when they're exporting it to these countries, that they are protected and that producers can't make them in those countries and call them bourbon and Tennessee whiskey. So next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to invite our friend and colleague, Allison Levitt, the managing director of the Wines and Spirits Shippers Association that has nearly 600 member companies and does great work to have a conversation about the impact and what they're thinking about tariffs. But before we do that, who better to tell us about the Wines and Spirits Association than Allison herself? So Allison, can you give us just a little overview of your association and what you do? Over to you, Allison.
Thank you so much, Christine. And we can go to the next slide that kind of outlines who we are and what our core values and what we call the pillars of our universe at WSSA. But first, thanks to Christine, thanks to Rob, thanks to everybody on the Discus team. It's always a pleasure to work with Discus. We are a partner member. And I think, too, the number of people on this call just demonstrate the commitment of the industry to engage in any and all of the hot topics that affect our industry. No lack of hot topics over the last months, and in fact, over the last years. I think it's been an incredible roller coaster and a lot to talk about on many levels. So from my background, I have been in the shipping industry my whole life, about 40 years involved in shipping at this point, and it does run in my blood. My ancestors were actually sea captains and even trading rum from the Caribbean for Chinese silk back in the early years of sailing ships. So it does run in my blood. My grandfather was a founder of Maine Maritime Academy. My father was a naval officer and merchant marine. So I can't escape it. I love it, and it's for the last 25 years I've been almost specifically involved with the movement of beverage alcohol around the world, and the last 12 years been running WSSA. So what we do at WSSA, really, we have three core missions that we live by. And the first and the original mission, we were actually founded by the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association, WSWA, and NABI, the National Association of Beverage Importers, to form an association that would work on negotiating competitive ocean freight rates and services with all of the global ocean carriers. Now, that was almost 50 years ago, and I think to put things in perspective, and I think perspective is everything in life. We really have to look at the long game. But 50 years ago, imports really barely existed in the USA, not just in beverage alcohol, but in general. And exports barely existed out of the USA. So in reality, what we are talking about with international trade, it's been around forever, but imports and exports out of the USA are still a relatively new business and have grown dramatically. And I think Christine showed that very clearly on some of the slides. And just to give kind of an example of that growth in shipping in general, again, back 50 years ago, the vessels that were carrying goods in and out of the United States were generally about 600 TEU, 620-foot equivalent units. They are now over 20,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. So incredible growth. Any of you who live near a port or maybe fly into Newark Airport or San Francisco or Savannah, you see these massive, massive ships that are out there. They're like skyscrapers in the water. And again, and just to add like perspective in terms of the tariffs 50 years ago too, tariffs in general were much higher across the board. So tariffs across the globe really are very, very low, but they have always been used as a tool to control the flow of trade as a revenue producer. And free and fair trade is really, what we focus on at WSSA when we talk about trade. And back to the shipping industry and rates just for a minute. I think most of you on this call are involved in either importing or exporting or both, and many of you very aware of the disruption in the overall shipping industry. That again, you look at wanting to have certainty both on your cost of goods and tariffs, but also in shipping. We are in the middle of the biggest shakeup in the shipping industry for the last 10 years. A complete change in the alliance structure of the ocean carriers. And we talk about these big ships. These ocean vessel owners, they cannot fill those ships on their own. So it's like when you are booking a ticket on American Airlines and it's a code share flight, you might be flying actually on British Airways. Same type of thing in ocean shipping. You may be booking a container with one ocean shipping line, but it's actually on a vessel owned by another carrier. So these alliances are structured to share the space on those massive vessels. And what's happening right now is that those alliances are changing. There's been some just major shakeups in the industry, and we are seeing incredible disruption in cargo flows. You may not notice this unless your person in your logistics department is telling you, I can't get my shipments out of Louisville for the next 2 weeks because there's no ships leaving out of Norfolk going into Europe, or my vessel out of Rotterdam is delayed for 16 days, and there's absolutely no real reason that anyone is giving me for that. But it is this massive disruption in the ocean alliances. The good news out there for all of you in shipping and importing and exporting is that rates are pretty low. We are back at sort of pre-pandemic levels. That incredible supply chain congestion that occurred during the pandemic is basically over. There's little pockets of it for various reasons, but levels are pretty low, and we expect that to maintain over the next few years. The bad news is not only are the administration looking at tariffs and reciprocal tariffs, they're also looking at the vessels themselves. So there's a piece of legislation that was introduced in December, the Ships for America's Act, known as the SHIPS Act. They are looking at the potential penalties for shipping on foreign flag vessels, specifically Chinese-built vessels. There's some in the act. It is an increasing number of percentage that of cargo that they want to be shipped on U.S. vessels. We don't have U.S. vessels now. We don't have a U.S. steamship line. So while, again, the intention is great, it would be great if the United States had a major global ocean carrier, had shipbuilding. That is a ways out if that's going to happen. So interesting things happening on all levels of what the administration is proposing, and it trickles down beyond tariffs too. So anyway, that's kind of on the shipping side. Risk management is our other major pillar of our operation. We run a massive cargo insurance program tailored to beverage alcohol. We insure over $1 billion worth of product, and the beauty of the program, one, it is tailored specifically for beverage alcohol. It is not a generic program that might be tacked on to someone's corporate policy. And being part of a group, if you have claims, then you do not get impacted by, say, a rise in your own insurance rates. We actually did a webinar yesterday with one of the experts on cybercrime, and the amount of theft going on in the world is incredible. The increases are massive, and it's really driven by organized crime around the world. So it could be in Chechnya or Armenia, or in the cartels in Mexico. So that is incredibly important to be aware of, and it's just a constant in our world now. The number of claims that we see, whether it's hijacking in Mexico, or a container arriving full of sand instead of cases of whiskey, or just pilferage. So that's something that we spend a lot of time on. And the last pillar is kind of what we're doing today. We try to be for the industry and amongst all the great associations, the associations that's involved in logistics and regulatory issues. We try to provide constant information to our members on everything from, port strikes, which again, anyone doing business in France right now, rolling port strikes. Friday, there's going to be public transportation strike in Germany. I mean, those types of disruptions, weather disruptions, as well as regulatory and customs issues. We similar to what Christine was laying out in terms of the tariffs, trying to show people exactly what tariff implementation looks like, the nuts and bolts. How does it work? And I will say, across the board in this area of kind of education and advocacy, the associations that represent this industry collaborate incredibly well. And certainly we'll talk about Toast and Tariffs Coalition at the end, but I think it's really an amazing industry in terms of that type of cooperation. So whether it's Discus or WSWA or NABI or California Wine Institute, restaurants, you name it, everybody pulls together to try to support the mission of maintaining this very, very vibrant industry. And we also collaborate with associations that are outside, say, just beverage alcohol. And I think, when we focus a lot here on exports, because the government likes exports. It's very hard to convince the U.S. government that imports are good. And I know we have a lot of importers on this line as well as exporters. And so it is a really difficult task to sit in front of congressional representatives and explain to them why imports are a positive thing. And, I started my career more in footwear and fashion and consumer goods, and that was even harder. So I think at least the beauty of beverage alcohol is that it is what we would call non-fungible. That's where, when we think too about exports and agriculture exports, the farmers are king. Everybody wants to listen to the farmers. Those products are easily transferable. Soybeans can be grown anywhere. Hay, almonds. So we are really unique in the fact that the products are unique to their terroir, and they cannot be compared to something like U.S. agriculture. So next slide, just real quick.
That's
just
right,
on
Allison, we're not
yeah.
widgets.
We are not widgets. So our membership is global. We actually have about 700 members in the USA and about 700 outside the USA. We put most of our efforts into the USA market, but this is a global industry. And one of my main goals when I joined WSA was to bring the association to a more global basis. And people outside the USA, suppliers all over the world, or importers as far afield as the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, anywhere. They want to get the information on what's happening around the world in the logistics segment, how to get into the USA market, what's happening in different ports. But I will say most of our members that are outside the USA, the thing that attracts them is actually the insurance piece. It's not easy to get the kind of insurance we offer on wine and spirits. So, and we also work with the global associations, whether it's Wines of South Africa or the Wine and Spirit Trade Association in the UK and other ports and whatnot. So very, very wide membership base, and we do try to serve the world in terms of this arena. So that's enough about us. Let's get back into the tariffs and turn it back to Christine.
All right, thanks, Allison. That was really, really helpful to give everybody an overview of your mission and what you do and who your members are. So thank you so much. So for this next portion, Allison and I are just going to have a dialogue here, but I encourage if any of you have questions that you'd like to ask during the conversation, we're happy to take questions. Just put those in the chat or the Q&A, whatever is easier for you. So we're going to have a bit of a dialogue here and then go over a few other things at the end and then open it up again for questions. So that'll be the format. So let me kick things off. Of course, tariffs have been on the front of mind for many industries, certainly the spirits industry. So can you just talk briefly about, what are your members' perspectives on the rapidly changing environment with tariffs? How are they coping with it? What's the general mood? Just give us a feel for that.
Well, again, I think everyone in this industry is extremely concerned about tariffs. And now our membership tends to be the people that are on the front lines of the logistics and customs side of things. So tariffs are absolutely, front and center on their radar, and every member out there is concerned with the impact. And and not just in the USA. I mean, just last night had a email from one of the wine associations in New Zealand, and really concerned about the reciprocal tariffs. And are we going to be hit April 1st? So it is a global concern, and not just a USA concern. And I think sometimes it's like the timing and the actual implementation. People rely on us for those nuts and bolts answers. So, for example, when we were talking about the tariff threat from Mexico and Canada, and the date of that, and the timing, and what one of the exceptions was cargo in transit, and we were while we were lucky to have the 30 days on that. It's still a question of what does that really mean in transit, if it's on the way to the port, if it's on the way to the border. So some of those questions come at us fast and furious. So I think the other thing that happens a lot during these periods, the C-suite is asking the logistics and compliance teams, how do we come up with alternative solutions? How do we avoid the tariffs? Is there some thing we can do to protect ourselves, whether that is bringing product in early, or people in the spirits industry are talking about, do we bring all our foreign spirits in bulk and start bottling in the USA? And just trying to find any ways around potentially the impact, the incredible financial impact of the tariff. So absolutely, every company is looking at the situation and trying to assess the impact.
Mm-hmm. And then just to maybe go back to one of your previous points and about how tariffs are used as a tool to manage trade. And just picking up on that point again, I think from a discus perspective, and the underlying goal of that, as we understand, the administration, they really want to support um, you know jobs and manufacturing in the United States, which is something, of course, we all support, right? We want a healthy economy. We want to grow jobs here and grow manufacturing. Absolutely. Um, but can we talk a little bit more just about the unique nature of our industry? And maybe you can also, since you represent wine too, I know this is a discus Ask the Expert webinar, but you cover both. So can we dive a little bit more into that and sort of the uniqueness of our industry? And I talked a little bit about it earlier, but I'm interested in sort of your view on that.
Well, certainly, I think it is looking at that, said the non-fungible nature of the product. So that is something that is very unique to the industry, and the balanced trade. That is unusual. And if we look at especially if you look at the transatlantic, as you mentioned, EU is the biggest market for the U.S. spirits industry, as well as the U.S. wine industry. And both of those flows really benefit from that low tariffs on both sides, low or zero tariffs on both sides. So that just doesn't happen in very many industries, that there is that back and forth flow, as well as the fact that, again, a Scotch whiskey is only going to come from Scotland, a tequila only from tequila. So I think those things are incredibly important as talking points, and to get that message out that it is a unique product.
Yeah. And certainly, as I noted, we did have zero for zero since 1997, which is, directly relates to the tremendous growth in our exports for certain. So obviously our industry has faced this issue before, and we saw the impact on our exports. But what do you think, what's different now? And are there any sort of lessons learned particularly from your industry's perspective, that would be helpful for today as we are, potentially grappling with tariffs, on a range of products? So are there any lessons learned that you can offer?
I think there's lessons learned, and I think that we also are in a different phase of the tariffs too. So I think the overall disruption, not only the tariffs, but just the pandemic disruption, supply chain issues, has made the overall industry, more resilient as well as more cautious. So I think the big difference now, I mean, the tariff decisions in the past, whether it was the Boeing Airbus civil aircraft situation or the steel and aluminum tariffs, there was some logic there. There was logic. There was a framework. There was timing. Um, and what's different now is that the announcements from the administration are just very unpredictable and potentially immediately implemented using these emergency powers acts, which we had not seen used on the past tariffs. So we are in a different phase. I think even going back to the Mexico Canada situation, I mean, March 4th is right around the corner. There are goods in transit. There are people that ship, for example, tequila on the water. We actually encourage that as a green and sustainable way to ship, as well as a more secure way. Those transit times, say from, for going from Jalisco to Veracruz and up to New York, that's 20 plus days, transit. So there are products that could hit that are in transit and would potentially be hit with 25% tariffs. And so the impact is significant, and the speed of it is what I think is so problematic right now that it's difficult to plan. I think the lessons too, I mean, resiliency, we'll talk a little bit, just thinking about, sorry to talk about wine again, but like the Australian wine market. The Australian wine market was hit by tariffs from China for, it was 2020 to 2024. And huge tariffs, I mean, over 100% tariffs on Australian wine. That was their biggest market. Those tariffs came off, and that market is almost back to normal. So yeah, you had to, those Australian winemakers had to diversify. They had to tighten things up. I mean, yes, some went out of business. So looking at diversification is also, I think, incredibly important, looking for those alternatives. And I think the other, kind of the other sort of financial and very, maybe this is a little bit too in the weeds, but companies know what to expect more with tariffs. So in the 25% tariff issues that happened previously, one of the impacts on that was that every importer of foreign product has to have a bond that is basically like an insurance policy to the US government that they will pay those duties and taxes that are due. And that bond, again, it's through a bonding company. There's a surety, and in general, when tariffs are low, duties are low, not a problem to get these bonds. When you start getting hit with these 25% tariffs, the bonding companies all of a sudden or the customs is saying your bond is insufficient. You do not have enough coverage for your volume of product coming in. And companies were forced to actually put up collateral, come up with letters of credit. These really fairly severe draconian measures to be able to continue to import. So good news, bad news, at least importers know that could happen again. Maybe they were able to decrease their bonds over the last few years. If this happens, they will at least be prepared. So that's a little bit in the weeds, but it's this trickle down effect of tariffs goes far and deep. And I think that's another thing, just that unfortunately when the kind of the talk is that, oh yeah, we don't pay for tariffs. We do pay for tariffs in many ways.
So I'm glad you gave that, concrete example. And I'm guessing there are many others about ways that logistics companies are preparing for, potentially the imposition of tariffs, is that sort of thing, right? And I'm guessing there's, better than I do, but I'm guessing there's a cost associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I was reading one of the items in the chat. So can you get, and I'm gonna answer that and then go back to you,
Yeah.
just because I did want to, there was a question on increase in demurrage costs.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to jump in. The issue that is happening right now that kind of came along with what we would have called the front loading of cargo prior to two things that were happening in the US. Obviously, the fear of tariffs. So December and early January, there was a huge influx of product coming in. And there was also the threat of a US East Coast port strike. And so what has happened, and a little bit similar to the COVID situation, all this cargo came in, and it has, compared to what is going out, there's a huge influx of empty containers that are trying to get returned into terminals from this big surge of cargo. There's not enough room on the terminals again. And with this disruption I was talking about earlier with the shipping alliances, there's all these canceled sailings. So they're just not evacuating the empty containers. So in terms of demurrage and detention costs, that is absolutely an issue, especially I would say New York Port. I think they're about the hardest hit right now
Mm.
in terms of not being able to get containers off terminals or into terminals. And I'll touch on that briefly. The OSRA 2022, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, that was actually came out of COVID. That is actually quite a protective act for USA importers and exporters. The law now says that if you cannot pull a container from a terminal or return it to a terminal, you are not to be charged demurrage or detention. So if you are getting charged for additional storage charges or detention costs on a container because of congestion, and you are doing your best to return that container or pick up that container, you have a claim with the Federal Maritime Commission.
Mm.
And fortunately, Federal Maritime Commission is still alive and well. The sign hasn't been taken down, so we're okay with them. So I would suggest that.
That's
Um,
great. Great
yeah,
advice. And then the question about South Africa,
yeah.
I guess I would say it's too early to say. There's some reviews going on. We don't have a USTR in place yet. I think he'll be confirmed soon, although I don't know what the exact date is. But consistent with the executive orders that have come out, they're reviewing everything. So I haven't seen anything specifically related to South Africa. But certainly the Discus team, my colleague Rob Marin, we're pulling together some materials, and we'll be weighing in with the administration on our goals and objectives as they continue to look at ways to reduce tariffs, and with their goal of reciprocal tariffs. But just to remind everybody, we have reciprocal tariffs, i.e. zero for zero tariffs in most of our major export markets, but there's certainly others that we would like to have greater access to from a U.S. export standpoint. Um, so speaking of export, do you have any advice for companies that are either active in export markets or looking to engage in export markets from, what do they need to know related to this issue, and the shipping component of it, which you represent?
Well, again, I think it's very similar advice to exporters as to importers. You just have to be on high alert and be able to pivot quickly as changes come. So, as we know, and what we saw with Canada, who immediately when we were going to put tariffs on Canadian product, they were going to immediately put tariffs on U.S. product. I think that's a very good example of what can happen. And obviously the pending April 1st outcome for the EU. So yeah, be on high alert in terms of the potential retaliatory tariffs that could happen quickly. In speaking just on that Canada issue for a minute, and you mentioned, Christine, earlier that, for example, the LCBO announced we're taking all USA product off the shelves. I think they did it, and obviously the measures were the drastic measures were avoided. They're back on the shelves. But just as an example, when we're looking at volume of, say, California product going into Canada to one of the liquor boards, their normal volume is 10 to 12 trucks a week. They're doing 2 to 3 maximum. I mean, they are only bringing in a minimal amount and an amount that they know they can sell very quickly. So
Mm.
already, exports from the USA are damaged. Things happen fast, and so I think that that's just something to be aware of. That even though we're in a lull, there's already an impact. I think that when there's, say, more maybe some of these reciprocal tariffs or some of the things that might roll out, we may have a longer window, say it's a 30-day, 90-day window where there is a time frame prior to tariffs going into effect. Then for both importers and exporters, it's a question of how quickly can we move product? Can we move product prior to tariffs being implemented, whether it's in the EU or in the USA? that situation will immediately drive congestion too. So
Mhm.
whether it's temporary or not, that does create its whole nother set of problems. There will be port congestion, there will be warehouse congestion, and again on the kind of the nuts and bolts sides, it does also impact what customs brokers have to do, what they have to prepare for on on either side of the pond. So on the U.S. side, just what has to happen when a new tariff is put into place, there has to be an adjustment in the customs system. It works through what's called Chapter 99, the temporary tariff chapter that gets linked to the country of origin or the tariff number. So, all these things do have to go into place, but logistics companies, customs brokers, they definitely need to be on top of those. And for anyone exporting or importing in this industry, definitely try to work with a company that really knows beverage alcohol, and that will benefit you.
Mhm. And I'm assuming you have a list of companies on your website of all of your members that can be a resource to those that are interested.
We are happy to be a resource, and just info@wssa.com, and we can help anyone out there that needs some assistance on any of those decisions or guidance.
So I want to come back to you use the word resilient. That the industry is resilient. We've lived through the tariff issue before. We came out of it. Frankly, I've been working in international trade for a couple decades too, and I was really surprised to see how immediate the impact was on our exports. Back in 2018, 2019, but also on the flip side, pleased to see how great the rebound was after that. So that does speak to me to resiliency and the opportunities that. So what are there opportunities? It is the administration has a different approach towards trade policy
Mhm.
and looking at it differently, and we understand that. So I'm just wondering, what are the opportunities that you see with some of the changes that they're thinking about, and what are you most optimistic about?
Um, Well, I think there's always opportunities, and I think despite kind of the different approach to trade, um, it's not that different as it was under the Biden administration in all reality. Like there's a lot of talk out there, but certainly free trade agreements have been on the decline, shall we say. There's been things that have been kind of consistent over the last 8 years. And yes, things seem a little more chaotic right now, but I do think there's plenty of opportunity out there in beverage alcohol. I was just at WSWA convention a couple weeks ago, and then at Wine Paris last week, and this industry is so vibrant, and everybody is interested in new products, new innovations, and I didn't feel any slowdown or any depressive mood out there. I think it's like, hey, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna keep doing the amazing things that we do and creating these products that we're so passionate about. Um, so I think that there's trade is going to happen. And yeah, I think one of the questions out there, or one of the comments, was about increased pricing. For sure, if tariffs happen on either side, on any country, yeah, prices unfortunately will go up, whether that's temporary or not. But that doesn't mean that the trade is going to stop too. So
Mhm.
I was feeling a little skeptical about how the mood at these particular events would be, and I was pleasantly surprised, and I just felt that everybody is going to just they're going to muscle through this and figure it out and keep innovating. So
Yeah,
I feel good about it.
yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I know, of course, in the U.S. marketplace, there are some challenges. We had our annual economic briefing recently and noted, a little bit of a slowdown on the spirits industry. So, from our perspective now would not be the time to have tariffs, during as we, are still frankly coming out of the
Yeah.
COVID recovery still. Um, so let's see if we missed. I don't know if we touched on all these questions yet. If there are a few others in the chat.
I think one of them, in terms of get the question about that the cost of the tariffs will be passed on, negatively impacting import industry jobs. I think we'll talk about that a little bit in the Toast Not Tariffs. I mean, these are stories that are super important, for legislators to hear, and especially on the import side, because that's the harder sell, shall we say. So import jobs, what that means, the amount of people working in your warehouse, doing your marketing, driving your trucks, et cetera. It's as important for imports as it is for exports. So getting those stories out, and I know Christine's going to talk about the coalition later on.
Well, why don't we just go to that slide?
Yeah.
Because I think some of that relates to how we're conveying our concerns about tariffs with other policymakers. So if you're interested in raising your voice, raising your hand and elevating your voice on tariffs, next slide, I wanted to let everybody know that there is a coalition called the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition that we launched back in 2021. It is unique in that it unites the entire beverage alcohol industry and others, in opposition to tariffs on spirits and wine. It includes national associations like Discus, like WSSA, but also state associations and state guilds. It includes the wholesalers, it includes retailers, it includes importers, logistics, and many, many craft distiller guilds. On the next slide, we have the full list of all 52 associations that are members. Apologies, this is a little small. But Luis, I think he put in the chat the link. If you're a part of a state association that might be interested in participating in our coalition, he put the link into how to sign up. There's also a web page. Luis, if you have a minute, you can put that on there too, that has more information. The Toast Not Tariffs Coalition, we issued a press release and a letter to President Trump on January 31st. That is also available on the website, outlining, our concerns about tariffs and talking broadly about, the hospitality industry. The U.S. Bartenders Guild is also a member. So really to help highlight, it's not just about the producers of these products, it's the farmers, it's the producers, and everybody in between that helps bring these products to market, right? So if you think about that, then that really, the National Restaurant Association is also a member, as you see here. So really to have a unified voice to explain the concern about tariffs broadly, and to just have a mechanism whereby we can convey these concerns in a productive in a productive way, understanding the goals of wanting to return jobs and enhance economic activity in the United States, but understanding the unique nature of our industry and how important we are to a broad swath of the economy. And then the next thing I would say, and so we are, sharing this information with contacts on the Hill, as well as within the administration. Several of the political appointees are still just getting situated. The Commerce Secretary, I think, was just confirmed this week, and there are others that are in the queue. And so we will certainly be, reaching out to talk to them about this issue and our concerns about tariffs. So please, if you're interested or have any questions, go to the website or reach out to me or Rob or Allison, who's been a member since the beginning too. And then the next thing I would flag, another way to get involved is our Spirits United effort. You can sign up, you can scan this QR code, and we'll also put something in the chat if you would like to add your voice to the petition. This is another way to make your voices heard. So why don't I pause there and see if there are any other questions? Did we miss any questions in the chat for the Q&A?
There was a question in terms of whether we see a lowering usage of U.S. alcohol or imported as a total due to tariffs. I think lowering of usage probably isn't that impacted by tariffs. I think there's certainly a lot of talk in the entire industry about the overall reduction in consumption both on, kind of the wellness trends and low and no alcohol trends. So I think that, for example, if tariffs are hit on foreign product, then and pricing them out, then we'll see a higher consumption of U.S. product instead of foreign product, and the same would go for overseas. So tariffs will definitely have some type of impact. Whether it actually, affects uh, actual consumption is probably less a factor than just the origin of the product.
Yeah, and what I would just say is, what we saw the first time around was that unfortunately spirits got caught in this tit for tat. So, if there are tariffs on imported products, then the concern is that, our trading partners, might then want to impose tariffs on US spirits exports. And so that would be sort of, one of the potential outcomes. Of course, we are urging them not to do that. For all the reasons we have, articulated during this call. So, as a comment, I think your bourbon whiskey bar graphs from the earlier shows, sorry, the impact because retaliatory tariffs says it all about the damage of tariffs. Yes, agree. Any other questions?
Oh, there are some in the Q&A as well. Yeah, so one of the questions was on the foreign trade zones or bonded warehouses. So foreign trade zone is one of those things that actually has been specifically outlined in the updated kind of tariff announcements, where the foreign trade zone, kind of the exemption for it being, so we say, outside the commerce of the USA, has been taken away. So they're being very specific about these tariffs, and for example, like no drawback on allowed on any of the tariffs that would be imposed. So that will be a little bit case by case basis in terms of how foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses will be treated. And happy to get into that offline because it gets pretty detailed.
Great. Okay. I think we answered some of the questions about, the coalition and our outreach, educating members of Congress about this and the incoming administration. Do you happen to know the current tariff rate on US wine into the EU? I don't, but we would have to look that up. Maybe you know, Allison.
And I don't have it on the top of my head, but it is quite low, and similar to the tariff on wine in the USA. So I think that the thing that has been brought up that is a little bit frightening is, say, the VAT, where we have a lot of layers of taxes here too. So I think that's where it's going to be with our industry a little more complicated too. So maybe again, EU or UK has a VAT tax, but on alcohol, we may have a low duty rate, but then we've got a federal tax and a state tax. So I think that's going to make it a little complicated. Maybe Christine, you can comment on that in terms of how they're going to look at reciprocity when we're looking at this type of tariff versus taxation, and how the VAT would be looked at in that comparison.
Yeah, I think that's a totally new issue, and I think it remains to be seen. But we know certainly that that's something that, according to the executive order, I think they're looking into. So we'll just have to follow that very closely, and continue to keep our coalition partners and Toastnet Tariffs informed, as we do when we have information that comes out. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And I think too, like, the Discus Conference, for me personally, and I think many others, the being able to get in front of congressional members and talk about this stuff and the complexity of the industry as well. And this is for the U.S. market. I mean, it is a very complex industry, and as it is in most countries, it's highly regulated. There are, different levels of taxation. So I think we have to just continually keep as many people informed as to what we do and the value of it and the complexity of it.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning the Discus Conference, which is at the end of March. And Louise, if you wouldn't mind putting the link in the chat if anybody's interested in joining our conference. We will be talking about tariffs among many other important topics at that conference, and it is here in Washington, D.C. So please take a look at that, and we hope you can join us for that. In the near term, I wanted just to let you know the next webinar will take place on Wednesday, February 26th at 2 p.m. The topic is tips to demand forecast and plan for 2025. So I think with that, we will wrap up the webinar. Thank you, Allison, so much for joining us and providing your perspective and your expertise from the shipping industry as we are all grappling with and trying to understand, what may or may not happen with tariffs. Thank you also for being a partner member and for joining in our efforts on the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition. Again, if anyone has any questions about any of the things we talked about, here's our contact information. Feel free to email us if you have any questions. And, if there are any prospective members, you can also contact me or my colleagues, Luis or Caleb as well. So with that, thank you all for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Christine.